There's a moment in everyone's life, a moment when you look in the mirror and feel like you're staring at a stranger, and it is in that precise moment that you uncover the most disturbing truth about your existence. The ego has been deceiving you from the very beginning. You are not who you think you are, and what I'm about to reveal in the next few minutes will forever change the way you see yourself. Because there's a secret that's been hidden from you since the day you were born, a secret that explains why you feel lost, why you feel empty, why you feel like you're living someone else's life. But before I tell you that secret, I need you to understand something. What you call yourself is actually software, a program installed in your mind when you were just a few years old, and that program is obsolete. Imagine you bought a computer 20 years ago and never updated the operating system. It still works, but it constantly crashes. It can't run modern programs. It's slow, frustrating. That's exactly what's happening with your ego. Do you know the cruelest irony of all? The ego was created to protect you, to keep you safe in a world that seemed dangerous to a defenseless child. But now this same protective mechanism has become your prison. Let me tell you how this happened to you. When you were a child, something very specific happened. At 2 or 3 years old, you started to realize there was a difference between you and the world around you. Before that, you were pure awareness, pure presence. There was no separation between you and your mother, between you and the universe. You simply were. You looked at a flower and didn't think, that's a pretty flower. You were the beauty of the flower. You felt hungry and didn't think, I'm hungry. You were the hunger. There wasn't a separate observer from the experience, and everything was a fluid and perfect unity. But then came the moment of great separation, the moment your ego was born. And this birth wasn't gentle. It was traumatic, because suddenly you saw yourself as small, vulnerable, dependent. You realized you could be rejected, abandoned, that your survival depended on pleasing certain people in certain ways. And your nervous system did what any nervous system would do. It created an identity to protect you, an invisible mask glued to your face. This mask learned quickly. If I'm good, mommy loves me. If I cry, they give me attention. If I'm smart, daddy is proud of me. And so, piece by piece, your personality was built, not based on who you really were, but based on what worked to keep you safe and loved. This mask had a name. It had characteristics. It had fears and desires, and it had a story. And you in your innocence believed this mask was you. But here's the problem. That child who created this mask was only 3 years old. She knew nothing about life, nothing about relationships, nothing about purpose or happiness. She only knew one thing: survival. And that's why you, today, with all your experience and wisdom, are still being controlled by the decisions of a 3-year-old, by the insecurities of a 3-year-old, by the fears of a 3-year-old. Can you see the madness of this? Eckhart Tolle discovered this truth in the most painful way possible. At 29, he was completely desperate, depressed, suicidal. His mind wouldn't stop repeating the same negative thoughts. I can't live with myself anymore, he thought repeatedly. But then, one dark night of the soul, something extraordinary happened. He realized something that changed everything. He realized that if he couldn't live with himself, then there must be 2 selves, the self that was suffering and the self that was observing that suffering. And in that moment, the mask fell. He realized he had spent his whole life identified with the voice in his head, with the thoughts, with the emotions, with the personal story. But he wasn't any of that. He was the awareness that observed all of it. And here's the part that will shake your foundations. The voice in your head, which you always thought was you, is actually your ego. It's the outdated 3-year-old software trying to run your adult life. Do you know why you feel lost? Why you feel like you're living on autopilot? Because you're letting a 3-year-old make all your important decisions. This child chooses your relationships based on the fear of abandonment. This child chooses your career based on the need for approval. This child reacts to conflicts as if their life is in danger, even when all that's at stake is their pride. And the most frightening thing of all, you don't even realize this is happening, because you identify so much with this wounded child that you think she is you, but she isn't you, never was. You are so much bigger than that, much more powerful, much wiser. You are the pure awareness that existed before this mask was created, and that will continue to exist after it's removed. And now I need to ask you a question that will change everything. Are you ready to discover who you really are, or would you rather continue to be a slave to the 3-year-old version of yourself? Because what I'm about to reveal will challenge everything you believe about your identity, everything you think you know about yourself, and there's no going back after this revelation. There's an exercise I want you to do with me. Now, while you're listening to this, close your eyes for a moment, breathe deeply, and observe your thoughts. Don't judge, don't control, just observe, as if you were a scientist studying an interesting phenomenon. Do you see, there's a you that is thinking, and there's a you that is observing those thoughts. Which of the two is the real you? The answer is simple, but devastating to the ego. The real you is the one that observes, the one that is present, the one that exists in the space between thoughts. The ego is just the character you invented to survive in a world that seemed threatening, but you don't need that character anymore. You've grown, evolved, become strong enough to live without the mask. And here's the secret that will liberate you once and for all. The ego doesn't need to be destroyed. It needs to be understood, recognized for what it is. A survival tool that has served its purpose. Imagine you've been driving a car with the brakes on for 20 years. The car still moves, but with a lot of effort. It consumes more fuel. It makes a lot of noise. And you've become so accustomed to this difficulty, you think driving is this way. But what if I told you you could simply release the brake? That you could drive smoothly, silently, efficiently? That life could be much easier than you imagine. The ego is the brake you forgot was engaged, and the most incredible thing is, when you start to release that brake, when you begin to disidentify from the ego, something magical happens. You discover inner resources you didn't even know existed. You discover a peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances. You discover a joy that needs no reason. You discover who you really are. But I need to warn you about something. When you begin this awakening process, when you start to see through the illusion of the ego, it will resist, it will fight, it will try to convince you that you're making a terrible mistake, because the ego genuinely believes that without it, you will die. It doesn't understand that you're simply freeing yourself from a fantasy. To it, this is the end of the world, and that's why so many people give up halfway. That's why so many people prefer to remain in the familiar prison, rather than risk the unknown freedom. But you don't have to be one of those people. You can choose freedom, you can choose authenticity, you can choose to discover who you really are, beneath all the layers of conditioning, fear, and lies that have accumulated over the years. And the first step is frighteningly simple. So simple you'll question if it really can be that. The first step is to stop believing everything your mind tells you. Stop identifying with every thought that arises. Stop thinking you are your emotions, your fears, your stories. You are not your thoughts. You are the one who thinks. You are not your emotions. You are the one who feels. You are not your story. You are the one living the story. And when you truly understand this, when this ceases to be just a concept and becomes a living experience, everything changes. Literally, everything. Your relationships change. Because you stop projecting your insecurities onto others. Your work changes. Because you stop seeking external validation and begin to create from your essence. Your relationship with money changes. Because you stop thinking it will solve your emotional problems. Your entire life changes. Because you are finally living it as yourself. Not as the character you invented to please others. Not as the version of you your parents wanted you to be. Not as a poorly made copy of someone you admire. You are living as you, the real you. The you who has always been there, patiently waiting beneath all the masks. And here's the most beautiful part of all this. When you remove the masks, when you stop pretending to be who you're not, you discover that you are far more interesting, far more powerful, far more loving than any character you could invent. You discover that the person you were trying to become is infinitely smaller than the person you already are. But there's an obstacle that prevents most people from making this discovery. An obstacle that the ego created specifically to keep you a prisoner of illusion. And this obstacle is more subtle than you imagine, more intelligent, more convincing. That's what I'm going to talk about in the second part of this journey. About how the ego uses your own attempts at liberation against you. About how it transforms even spirituality into another form of ego. And about how you can finally be truly free. Because there's a difference between knowing the truth and living the truth, mate. And that difference is everything. Now take a deep breath, because what I'm about to reveal is the most subtle and dangerous obstacle on the path to liberation. It's the final trick the ego uses to keep you prisoner. Even when you think you're freeing yourself, the ego has discovered how to camouflage itself as spiritual wisdom. Have you ever noticed how some people become even more self-centered after they start studying spirituality? How they use profound concepts to feel superior to others? How they transform even humility into a form of pride? They talk about awakening, but judge those who are still asleep. They talk about non-ego, but feel special for understanding it. They talk about universal love, but treat with disdain those who don't share their spiritual beliefs. This is no coincidence. It's the ego doing what it does best: adapting, evolving, surviving. When the ego realizes you've discovered its game, it doesn't give up. It simply changes strategy. If you no longer want to be the successful self, it offers to be the spiritual self. If you no longer want to be the self that has all the answers, it transforms into the self that is beyond all questions. It exchanges the pride of money for the pride of voluntary poverty. It exchanges the pride of physical beauty for the pride of inner beauty. It exchanges the pride of intellectual knowledge for the pride of wisdom beyond the mind. It's brilliant, diabolical, and it happens to practically everyone who begins a journey of self-discovery. Let me give you a concrete example. You start meditating. In the first few days, you feel a deep peace, a connection with something greater, and then subtly, without you realizing it, the ego infiltrates the experience. Suddenly, you're no longer meditating to connect with your essence. You're meditating to be a spiritual person, to feel superior to unawakened people, to collect mystical experiences like trophies, and the worst part, you don't even realize it's happening. Because the spiritual ego is much more subtle than the material ego. It uses the language of transcendence to create a new form of separation. It convinces you that you are evolved while others are asleep, that you understand things that others can't comprehend, that you are on a higher level of consciousness. Do you see the problem? The ego simply changed clothes. Before it felt special for having money, success, or beauty. Now it feels special for having wisdom, peace, or enlightenment. But the basic structure remains the same. The need to feel separate, superior, special. The need to have an identity, even if that identity is the person without identity. And here's the cruelest part. The more you fight against the ego, the stronger it becomes. The more you try to get rid of it, the more it strengthens, because the struggle itself fuels the illusion of separation. It's like trying to escape quicksand by struggling. The more you struggle, the deeper you sink. So what's the way out? How do you break free from a prison that uses your very attempt at liberation as another form of confinement? The answer will surprise you with its simplicity. Stop fighting. Stop trying to get rid of the ego. Stop trying to destroy it. Stop trying to transcend it. Simply acknowledge that it's there. Observe it. Accept it. Just as you would accept a frightened child. When you notice the ego taking over, when you catch yourself being defensive or trying to impress someone or comparing yourself to others, don't judge yourself. Don't try to forcefully stop it. Simply observe. Ah, look at that. The ego is active now. How interesting. It's like being in traffic and realizing you're stressed. You could fight the stress, judge yourself for being stressed, create more stress about being stressed. Or you could simply acknowledge, I'm stressed right now, it's natural. I'll breathe and relax, because that's exactly what the ego is. A frightened child desperately trying to keep you safe, using methods that no longer work. When you stop fighting this child and begin to understand it, something extraordinary happens. It relaxes, it stops screaming, it stops demanding constant attention, and finally allows you, the conscious adult, to take the reins of your life. Imagine you're driving a car, and in the back seat is a screaming child telling you where to go, and you have two choices. You can fight with the child, try to silence it forcefully, stress over the screaming, or you can gently acknowledge that it's scared, reassure it, and continue driving in the direction you, the adult, know is right. The second option is infinitely more effective and more loving. Eckhart Tolle discovered this in a very specific way. After his great realization, he spent years trying to understand what had happened to him, and he discovered something fascinating. The transformation didn't happen because he destroyed the ego. It happened because he stopped identifying with it. He realized he could observe thoughts without being the thoughts. He could feel emotions without being the emotions. He could have a personality without being limited by it. He discovered the difference between using the ego as a tool and being used by the ego as a puppet. And this difference is revolutionary, because when you're no longer identified with the ego, when you're operating from your pure awareness, you can still function in the world. In fact, you function much better. You can still have ambitions, but they don't control your self-worth. You can still feel fear, but you don't make decisions based on fear. You can still have preferences, but you don't despair when you don't get what you want. You become functional without being dysfunctional, human without being a slave to humanity, personal without being a prisoner of personality. And here's the most beautiful paradox of all. When you stop trying to be special, you discover you already are unique. When you stop trying to be loved, you discover you already are love. When you stop trying to find your identity, you discover you already are wholeness. The search ends not because you found what you were looking for. It ends because you realize you were never lost. But let me tell you what really happens when you live from this place of non-identification, when you truly incorporate this understanding into your daily life. First, your relationships completely transform. You stop trying to extract love from others to fill the inner void. You stop projecting your insecurities. You stop trying to change people to fit your fantasy of how they should be. You stop fighting with your partner because they didn't say the words you needed to hear. You stop resenting your parents because they weren't perfect. You stop feeling betrayed when a friend doesn't meet your unspoken expectations. Instead, you love from abundance. You accept people as they are. And paradoxically, this creates far more intimacy and connection than all the emotional manipulation in the world. Second, your work becomes an expression of your natural creativity, not a desperate search for validation. You stop needing to prove your worth through your results. You stop working 60 hours a week trying to impress people who don't even care that much. You stop sabotaging your own opportunities out of fear of failure. And ironically, your results improve dramatically because you're no longer blocked by performance anxiety. You create from inspiration, not desperation. Third, your relationship with money and success transforms. You can still have ambitious goals, but they don't determine your inner peace. You can still want things, but you don't need them to be happy. You stop spending money you don't have to impress people you don't like. You stop thinking that another zero in your bank account will finally make you feel complete. And fourth, perhaps the most important of all, you develop a completely different relationship with suffering. You understand that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. That you can feel sadness without identifying as a sad person. You can feel anger without becoming an angry person. You learn to surf the waves of emotions instead of drowning in them. But there's something even deeper that happens, something that words can't adequately describe. You begin to feel a direct connection with the very essence of life, with the pure awareness that animates all things, not as a special mystical experience that happens once in a while, but as the basic reality of your existence, as the silent background against which all of your experience happens. And when you live from this place, when you know your true nature not as a concept but as a living experience, something extraordinary happens. You realize there was never really a problem to be solved. There was never really anything wrong with you that needed to be fixed. The ego wasn't your enemy. It was just a misunderstanding, a confusion about who you really are. And now that the confusion has dissipated, now that you can see clearly, you realize you've always been perfect exactly as you are. Not perfect in the sense of having no flaws, perfect in the sense of being complete, whole, enough. The 1,000-mile journey in search of yourself ends exactly where it began, in you, in the real you, in the you that has always been there, patiently waiting beneath all the layers of conditioning and fear. And the most beautiful irony of all this searchings, all this struggles, all this suffering, it was absolutely necessary, because it was through the experience of being lost that you could truly appreciate what it means to be home within yourself. It was through the experience of being fragmented that you could recognize your natural completeness. It was through the experience of emptiness that you could discover your intrinsic abundance. The ego wasn't a mistake. It was the path, the longest possible path back home, but also the only path that would make the return truly meaningful. And now you know who you really are, not as a belief or a hope, but as a silent certainty, permeating every cell of your being. You are the pure awareness that observes everything that happens. You are the space in which all thoughts, emotions, and experiences arise and disappear. You are the unconditional love that needs no object. You are the peace that doesn't depend on circumstances. You are the silent witness of your entire life. The you that was present when you were 5 years old is still present now. The you that will be present at 80 years old is the same you that is here in this moment, that you never ages, never gets hurt, never dies. All your experiences, joys and sorrows, successes and failures, loves and losses, are like waves on the ocean of your consciousness. The waves may be big or small and calm or tempestuous, but the ocean remains unchanged. You are the ocean, not the waves. You always were this. You always will be this. Even when you forget, even when you lose yourself again in identification with the ego, this never changes, because this is your essential nature. It's who you are beneath all the masks. It's who you were before you learned your name, and who you will be long after that name is forgotten. And now that you know this, now that you've had at least a glimpse of this truth, your life will never be the same. Because once you taste real freedom, it's impossible to be content forever with the prison, however comfortable it may be. The seed has been planted, and even if you sometimes forget, even if you sometimes revert to old patterns, that seed will continue to grow, until one day you wake up completely and realize you never want to sleep again. That day could be today, it could be tomorrow, it could be 10 years from now, it doesn't matter, because now you know it's possible. You know that freedom is real. You know that you are so much more than you ever imagined, and that changes everything forever.